Welcome to the very last class. Thank you guys for bearing with me. I hope that this series has been helpful for you. Today, I'm shifting gears a little bit and I'm going to be focusing on seasonal planting. So this is keeping in mind planting not only for our wildlife across many seasons, but also for our own enjoyment and in the sort of aesthetics value so that we can try and pull as many seasons out of our plants as possible. I use daffodils as kind of a classic example. I love daffodils, don't get me wrong. But like with most bulbs, they come up, they bloom, they're very happy, they're very beautiful for a short period of time, and then they go away and they're done for the rest of the season, right? So you only get a very brief period out of that plant. And what I'm going to try and concentrate on today is plants that provide not only multi-seasonal benefits, but making sure we get those benefits in all of the seasons, not just one. All right, and we've made it to week 3. So again, I really appreciate you guys sticking with me. What I'm going to do after today is send out a quick survey or a link to a survey. I really appreciate feedback from you all. It really helps me measure the impacts of what I'm doing, and it also helps kind of guide me for future programs. So again, I really appreciate all the feedback you've been giving me over the last couple of weeks. Like I said, today we're going to look a lot at the seasonality of plants. So, we're going to go from spring, which is kind of represented in that top left corner. Those are trilliums. So trilliums are what we call spring ephemerals. These are native plants that are adapted well at blooming early in the season before the leaves of the trees are out. Because of course, once they are blocked from the sunlight, they don't photosynthesize as well. So they've actually adapted to photosynthesizing at this very short period of time in the spring before basically fading away, and then you don't see them for the rest of the year. But we're also looking at summer. So a lot of bright colors end up happening in the summer. And then the bottom left, we're going to be looking at fall plants. So plants that are going to be really crucial to have. Like I said, we want to provide a lot of pollen and nectar for our insects going into winter, because they need to be ready for winter because they essentially hibernate. There's a different word for it, but essentially they hibernate. And then in this is the challenging season, is winter, and trying to find things that are interesting not only to us, but that provide mostly for birds, who are the ones who are still active throughout the winter, who are looking and requiring berries that provide them with those fats and nutrients that they need to get through winter, because it's a tough season. All right, and I like to lead off with this this chart from this particular book. It's called Delaware Native Plants for Native Bees. I think it's a really good representation of plants that bloom across these different seasons. And I'm a visual person, so I love charts, especially ones where I can kind of visually see what is going to be the progression of what's blooming over the course of time. And what you'll notice from this chart is that some of our earliest blooming plants are in fact not perennials. They're almost all shrubs and trees. And so that's why, we emphasize having that diversity of shrubs and trees and flowering plants in the landscape, because trees can provide these really early seasonal benefits. In fact, I'm just starting to see the red maple flowers blooming, and that's pretty much the first thing to me that blooms in the year that insects will use. So on some of these warm days like we had this weekend, I'm already starting to see a little bit of insect activity. I saw a bat flying around. I asked him what he was doing. I thought he was maybe confused. But so things are almost starting to wake up earlier and earlier, mostly because our temperatures are rising a little bit. But that's why it's really critical to have these blooming trees that we really undersell as a plant into our landscape. So, red maples will be blooming really early, and then we'll start to get more into the blueberries and serviceberry or the shad bush. In fact, it's called shadbush because it starts to bloom about the time that the shad runs begin. So there's a good historical reference there. And then you'll see as we sort of progress more into summer, we'll emphasize more of the perennial plants that are blooming because they've had time to pop up out of the ground. They need time to make their flower and photosynthesize and get ready for that season. So don't undersell the value of having these flowering trees and shrubs and what a good role they can play, not just in terms of how much biomass they produce, because of course, if it's a larger tree, it's going to have a lot of flowers, and so it's going to be able to support a lot of things. So
quick
this is
question
just a,
for you.
oh,
Can I
I
ask a
have a
quick question?
question.
What
Yes,
about witch
please.
hazel? Is
Witch
that native?
hazel? Oh, yes, witch hazel. Although our native witch hazel tends to bloom almost like November, December, and it's a much
No, it's a
smaller,
winter
more
bloomer.
understated plant. Now, it doesn't have as many pollinator visitors just in terms of when it's blooming, and usually
Uh-huh.
because those insects are already hibernating or in the process of. Yeah, but those are definitely great plants to have. And I don't mention skunk cabbage in my
Oh, yeah.
presentation because it's not really in cultivation, but those are actually a really cool flower that emerge basically in January and February. They'll actually create their own heat so that if they're covered by snow, they'll melt up through the snow and be able to bloom. And they have kind of a stinky flower because they attract flies rather than some of our other traditional pollinators. So you're right. There are things that are even earlier, even more obscure than this. So yeah, there's possibilities all times of the years. That's what I like to say. Winter is not a dead time. It is thriving just like anything else. It's just more subtle, right? Okay, and of course it is about the flowers sort of, but it's also not just about the flowers. We can find interesting features using a lot of these different characteristics. So while flowers benefit insects probably the most, there's still things that have interesting bark or structural bark, fruiting structure. So berries, fruits, things like that, fall color, seed heads, foliage. So we're definitely going to emphasize a lot more of that today rather than just the flowers. But hopefully it'll give you some ideas and get you to start thinking about what season you might be lacking or might be interested in having more interest in or more color in. All right, so real quickly, I'm just going to cover a couple of really early seasonal flowering trees and shrubs. Some of the earliest you're going to see actually out right now, black willow is already starting to bloom. Red maple is not far behind. So like I said, I'm just starting to see the red maple flowers come out. You wouldn't think that these would be plants that are really beneficial to pollinators, but they are because they are so early. And like I said, during this time where we're starting to warm up, as soon as it starts to warm up, the bees come out because of, like a temperature cue. They don't come out because they smell the flowers or something like that. So when it's warm out and they start to forage, if they don't find anything, that's energy lost. So it's a big detriment to them. So by having these really early season sources, they'll be covered because they're pretty much the only thing in bloom at that time. So they need to be able to find that if they're out foraging. And then as we start to approach April, we'll see more of the serviceberry and the red buds and the blueberries. So serviceberry is, I'm sorry, redbud is in that bottom left corner. That's a pretty iconic tree. Most people are pretty familiar with it. Very attractive color. To me, it reminds me of driving out to the mountains. It's definitely more of like a Piedmont or mountain area tree, but it is technically native to the coastal plain as well. So it's always a really lovely tree. It's a very crowd pleasing kind of tree, as well as the flowering dogwood, which is what we see in the bottom right corner. One of the issues I have with the flowering dogwood is number one, there's so many cultivars out there, and some are helpful, some are not. This tree gets a pretty bad leaf disease called a dogwood anthracnose. and it's very, it's basically impossible to control. And so it's kind of a short-lived tree. It also gets planted sort of as a feature plant in the middle of a yard with full sun, when in its native habitat, it's actually an understory tree, and it actually prefers at least part shade, if not sometimes full shade. And so it prefers to be along the edges of woodlands and things like that. But instead, sometimes we put these plants in a sunnier or a harsher environment, and then, they're more susceptible to disease that way. But also, if you have an acidic soil, blueberries, like in the top left, that's actually deerberry. It's a type of blueberry. But the berries are very astringent. You would not want to eat them. But the wildlife really love them. And it's definitely this group of plants that is very beneficial for wildlife. You might recall back when we talked about pollinators last week, blueberries were one of the top shrub groups for caterpillar activity. And so, and it also has multi-seasonal benefits, which I'll talk about a little bit later. And then, of course, the amelanchier, or the serviceberry, in the top right corner, which looks a little bit similar, but it's actually got a bigger flower, and it's a little bit wider. Okay, and then so late spring to early summer, now we're looking at a lot more variety in terms of what species are blooming. Black cherries, black locust, which is really high in value to people who keep honeybees, because it makes a really delicious honey. And then viburnums, dogwoods, the shrub dogwoods, not the flowering dogwood, and blackberries, which people don't often think about as a flowering plant. It actually has very high wildlife value for bee or native bee activity. And elderberry, which is another one that it's an edible fruit for us. But in the spring, it has these really nice big flowers. It's the picture in the middle on the bottom. Those flowers are almost like, I would say 10 to 12 inches across. So it's all these clusters of, and of course, that's where you get, what is it, Saint Germain, the liqueur is elderflower. So not that I'm encouraging anybody to go and do that, but just fun facts that I like to share with everybody. So we're seeing a lot more of these smaller clusters of small white flowers. And that is very popular, again, with a wide variety of pollinators that are starting to wake up and starting to get more active. And if you guys don't know this already, I'm a bit of a nerd. And so I made this chart. I actually went through bee group by bee group, and I tried to chart out the times of emergence that we see these different bee groups. And so the yellow is an emphasis on, that's the highest number of activity. And blue means there's some activity, but it's not the peak activity. And so we'll see a lot of, or the majority of bee activity is happening March through May. And then again, different groups June through almost October. So we need plants, basically things that are active from March to nearly November. So that's a wide thing to fill. It's not just about summer. It's about everything in between, because these different bee species emerge at different times. So you'll see a lot of activity very early in the spring. This is when a lot of our nesting and bees are coming out. The females are trying to create nests for laying eggs and for making larvae and things like that. And then again, you'll see their activity sort of continue until they're forced back into hibernation. This isn't the whole chart, by the way. There's a lot more bee groups than this. This is just a snapshot. I'm happy to share that chart with anybody who wants to get as nerdy into it as I have. But it's basically information that was compiled from Bees of Maryland Field Guide and the Maryland Biodiversity Project. So these are just kind of reinforced this chart that I made. And this is a chart from the Xerces Society. So this is a little bit more commercial. So these are just an idea of plants that bloom over a variety of seasons. And you can see some of the early bloom periods, Coreopsis, you'll see penstemon in May and June. And then it gives you different seasonal plants that are going to be occurring over the year. Ending a lot with, you'll notice a lot of goldenrods on that list, as well as sunflowers. So again, many early season flowers belong to shrubs and trees. So don't discredit the role that they play. It's actually very hard to find flowers that bloom in early spring if they are not ephemerals. All right, and here's just a quick list that, of course, this is not finite, but for your own purposes, thinking about flowering and perennials and annuals during different seasons. And these are some of the ones I recommend, or at least the groups, the genus I recommend. There's a lot more species that belong to all of these groups. But these are good ones to start with. This is great if you've got like a small plot or garden that you're looking into making like a pollinator or seasonal garden. You'll want at least one representative of these different groups, if not several. And again, I will be sharing the slides with you guys, so don't worry about trying to write this down or memorize it. I'm happy to share it with you all. All right, and then, again, we're also going to look at different seasonal attributes. It's not just about the flowers, although, certainly our insects are very reliant upon flowering plants. But we have a native persimmon, believe it or not. It's one of my favorite trees. It is just so cool. And these are the fruits from, of course, the female persimmon. It's one of those plants that requires a male and a female plant in order to make the fruit. So if you see a persimmon bearing fruit, it means there is a male somewhere nearby. These are actually really tasty if you allow them to go late into the season, and they are only ripe, like October maybe. So it takes a very long time for them to ripen and be able to fall from the tree, basically. But of course, this is popular with a lot of mammals for a very good reason. They can be a very tasty fruit. If you pick the fruit too early, it actually is too astringent. It's really hard to eat. It makes your mouth kind of like pucker up. But after we've had like a good cold, even, not even a frost, but just a good cold period, those fruits definitely sweeten up. Now they have big seeds in them, but the fruit is very fleshy, very delicious if anybody tries it themselves. And then river birch is another one that's a great example of using bark in the landscape. So something that makes winter a little bit more interesting. And of course, again, recalling that we had that list last week of plants for caterpillar activity. Birches were among the top 5 woody plant groups that support caterpillar activity. So we know that they are good in terms of supporting caterpillars and then birds, but also, having this attractive bark makes it a bonus for us because it's more interesting to look at in the winter than some other things, right? It's the picture doesn't really do it justice. It has a very orangey salmon hue to it, especially that underbark. So it does add a little bit of color. And seed heads. I think people make a huge mistake by trying to cut everything back in the fall. I know that's kind of like the commercial standard is, we come in, we mow everything back to the ground, and then we take it away for winter. We should be leaving all of this stuff up during the winter, because not only is it really interesting to look at, or more interesting than the bare ground, at least in my opinion, but there's a lot of birds that will eat the seed heads. They'll pick the seeds out of the seed heads all winter long. And so it does create sort of a structural garden. Now it might be in more gray and brown hues, but certainly better than trying to mow everything back to the ground. So these are seed heads after a hard frost, and I just think they look really spectacular. But in the bottom left, that's actually a type of wetland plant. It's called woolgrass. And its seed head is this kind of orangey cluster of seeds. Let me see if I can't get my pointer out here. So these clusters are the seed heads, and they're very orange in color. Again, I feel like the picture doesn't really do it justice. They're very easy to see in the winter because they stand out with that color. And you'll actually notice a little sprig of broom sedge here. I know I talked about broom sedge before, but just to reinforce, native grasses are really fantastic and we should be incorporating them into the landscape as well. And here, another example of having layers of plants where we have the birches in the background. So there we have our interesting bark. And then we have native panicum grasses kind of in the middle. And then in the foreground, all these echinacea flower seed heads that, again, very structural, but then they also provide a lot for birds during the winter. Okay, and if we want the most bang for our buck, I look at plants that are also multi-seasonal in interest. So that means they have different things going on throughout the year. I'll explain that in a second, but they also have high wildlife value. So viburnums make my top list of multi-seasonal shrubs, mostly because they come out in the spring and they have a really interesting flower in the summer. So they have clusters of white flowers in the summer. And then come fall, they have interesting fall color. And then they also bear fruits on those flowering seed heads. And those fruits are very beneficial for birds. They're high in fats and proteins for birds. And so there we go. We've got 3 seasons just in one plant. Same thing with red twig dogwood. We have flowering in the spring. They have clusters of white flowers as well. And then they form kind of like a whitish gray berry. It's very interesting, but they get snatched up really quick because birds love them. They don't wait till winter to eat them. They'll eat them right in the summer. And then in the winter, after it's lost all of its leaves, this is my favorite time to have red twigs because the name implies the twigs turn red, bright red in the winter. And then you have something sort of interesting and structural in the winter time. It's one of my favorite plants, actually. We have aronia berry, which I have a picture of in the next slide. Southern wax myrtle is one of our native evergreen options. So not only is it evergreen, but it also has a nice smell to it. And the females will bear the dark berries or the dark fruits that are also really interesting. Virginia sweetspire is one that landscapers have actually used quite a bit. It's now kind of been popularized in the nursery industry because there's a lot of cultivars that they've made with this. Little Henry is a common one. Another one, it blooms a very fragrant flower in the summer. And then in the fall, it turns the most amazing colors of red. It's got very great fall color. And then sumacs, which people don't think about including in the landscape. But this is another plant that has a lot of different seasons of interest. And then inkberry, which is another sort of adopted landscaping plant. It's a really good alternative for boxwoods. So this is a native shrub that is evergreen. And it will produce dark blueberries on the female. So you need a male and a female plant for inkberry, but it has high wildlife value because it is evergreen. So things tend to nest and get protected in these shrubs, but they also produce berries that are popular. Here's some more flowering shrubs that produce really interesting berries. We have beautyberry on the left, and this is not to be confused with the Japanese beautyberry, which is sold in a lot of nurseries, plant nurseries. Please do not purchase the Asian variety. It's quite invasive, and it'll actually pop up in many places. I actually think our American beautyberry, which is in this photo, is a lot more attractive. And it's a lot more adaptable to our heavy clay soils, especially here on the coastal plain. You'll notice the American beautyberry will have these clusters of bright purple berries, and they're clustered very close to the stems of the plants. The Japanese one, actually, the berries are hanging. They actually hang further away from the branch. So that's kind of one way to tell them apart. But any plant nursery should know the difference between the two. And chokeberry on the right, which isn't, I understand it's not a very attractive name, but this is a very attractive shrub. This is another one that has clusters of white flowers in the spring and summer. And then the berries darken to this really dark purple, and they're quite a larger berry, larger than most. technically edible for human consumption, but I don't recommend it without a lot of sugar. Maybe Shane can talk more about chokeberry and how to process it, but even just the berries are attractive themselves. And then in the fall, the foliage turns a really nice orange and red color. So it definitely has a lot of multi-season benefits, and it's a very hardy shrub, so it can grow in a wide variety of environments. Here's a picture on the left. That's blueberry. Actually, nobody thinks about blueberries for their fall color, but they are spectacular. This is a low bush blueberry. Now the fruits are very tiny. I like to hunt and gather them, but you know, you'd be there for years if you tried to get enough to make a blueberry pie. But still, it's a very attractive plant, not just for the berries, but also for this fall color. But it needs a very acidic environment, right? So if you have an acidic soil, this is a great option. And then on the right is winterberry. This is the deciduous cousin of the inkberry I mentioned before. So the leaves will actually fall. A lot of people recognize winterberry because of those bright red berries. This is another one where you're going to need the male and the female plant. And any nursery worth its salt is going to know that. And so they shouldn't sell you just one or the other. You need two. And you can have one male for several females. You know, it doesn't need to, they're not monogamous. You don't need a pair for each female. So a really great plant for winter interest. And these berries hang around for a little while, but they'll disappear because the birds will eat them. After several frost periods, it'll actually kind of soften the berry and make it more palatable to birds. And you'll notice that the berries end up disappearing. And that's okay, right? Because ultimately we want our wildlife in the landscape to use the plants, even though we also can enjoy them. And of course, I could wax poetic about native grasses for a very long time, but I tried to make it sort of a short couple of slides. But grasses are fantastic, not just for their winter interest, but their wildlife value in terms of providing habitat, not just for birds, but for insects as well. I know we talked a little bit about that last week. Bottlebrush grass, this is a early season grass. So it's what we call a cool season grass. So they do most of their growth in the cooler season of spring. And then come summer, they're pretty much done. But they have these really cool seed heads. You can start to see it in this picture. And I actually still have bottlebrush seed heads that are still standing and still have seeds on them, even now in February. So they last a very long time. Split-beard bluestem is probably one of the most underrated grasses in the landscape. It is just not only beautiful because it has this kind of orangey red tone to the stems, but the seeds themselves, the seed heads themselves are very fluffy and white. It just makes a really attractive plant. And then we've got more grasses that are just, we don't think of them as being colorful, but in the fall, they are definitely the kings of the landscape. And I like to leave them throughout the winter because of the same reason. So we have little bluestem here combined with some New England aster in the background. That's a great combination of plants to have, both for their color and for their interest for insects. And then we have these great patterns of pink muhly grass in the foreground. So this is, it actually comes in like a pink version, but on it, or I'm sorry, a white version. So there's a white seed head of this plant, but honestly, I prefer the pink. And then you'll see there's actually a line of panicum or switchgrass in the background. And I wonder if making a hedge out of panicum would be a good option for trying to deter deer from entering the garden. I'm just thinking back to that question somebody had right away. So these are great plants to use in the landscape. Northern sea oats is another one, although I like to caution people, northern sea oats like to wander. So that means they can spread pretty easily because these seed heads are really good at germinating. So once they turn brown and then drop to the ground, you might find you have a lot of little babies popping up. So this is really good for an area where you might be battling invasive plants. So you want something that's a little more aggressive to fight back. But also just look at the structural seed head of this plant. It's just fantastic. This isn't even a, I always say this isn't even a great picture because the seed heads turn brown. And then when the wind blows them in the fall, they actually like clack together, and it really does sound like the ocean or like the sea. So really fantastic options that we have. And for people who are apprehensive about using native grasses in the landscape, these are like my top 5 grasses that I would recommend for like a home landscape. So you'll notice northern sea oats is not on this list because of its habit to wander. So these picks are a little bit they're a little more orderly. They like to stay put, so they don't wander, they don't spread as much, but they're very attractive. And I can't talk about seasonal interest without talking about fall color. Of course, we have a lot of plants that make great impact when it comes to fall color. We have bald cypress on the left, which is actually quite a large swamp tree. It's a wetland kind of tree. I have more information about it in the next slide. And then this is a great landscape plant, is this dwarf Fothergilla. And the picture in the upper right-hand corner is its flower in the spring. This is, again, multi-seasonal interest. So it blooms these really like alien looking flowers in the spring. And this is before all the foliage is out. So it really is kind of a cool plant. It's got these really cool flowers. And then in the fall, it has this really beautiful fall color. So it'll turn like a maroon or orange color. Sometimes I've even seen it bright red. You'll see a little bit turning here. Just a really great landscape plant. And this is the dwarf version. There's actually like a full-sized version. But it's a little bit larger and its form is a little bit more leggy. It's definitely more of like a woodland plant. So I like to recommend the dwarf version for home landscapes. So if you're looking for trees that have really cool fall color, here's my list of trees with different fall color. Most of the ones I favor tend to be red and orange because it's just a really nice color that pops. But hickory trees should not be overlooked as a landscape plant. Now they have a really cool fall color, especially the brilliant yellows. So pignut hickory, oh gosh, I'm blanking on some of the other hickories that we have, but mockernut is another one that's going to have like a bright yellow color. This is a compound leaf, so it's quite large. And then even better, it produces all these nuts that are really beneficial for wildlife. So again, multi-beneficial plants that serve many different roles. Same thing with tulip poplar. They have a really cool leaf shape. And their fall color is also kind of a nice yellow, but their flowers in the spring are also coveted because they're quite large and they really do look like a tulip flower. And again, high wildlife value when it comes to caterpillars. This was one of our top 5 woody plants for caterpillar activity. So you'll notice almost everything on this list has a compound interest, not just fall color, but maybe they produce berries or fruits or nuts that are beneficial to wildlife, or they have multi-seasonal benefits. So this is, every time we buy a plant or put something in the landscape, it's our opportunity to do, the most bang for your buck. You want to make sure that you're using a plant that does a lot of different things, that's multi-talented and multifaceted. And so if you don't know where to start, let's say you're looking at native plants and you're like, I don't even know where to go. I know Michaela gave me all those lists, but I can't keep them all straight, whatever. There's handbooks and resources out there available. I love this book. It's very handy. I think it's a good start for people who are interested in native plants. It's called Native Plants for Wildlife Habitat and Conservation Landscaping. And you can either get it as a hard copy, or you can find the PDF version of this book online. It's pretty easy if you type in the title. What's nice is in the very back of the book, there are lists of recommendations for different growing conditions. So there's a list, plants for freshwater wetlands. I think there's even one for deer resistant plants. Let me see here. So there's solutions for slope, sunny slope. Yep, deer resistant plants. It's on it's the very last list. So those are plants you may want to look at if deer are a problem for you, Jean.
Okay.
But this book is also been digitized, and it's available under nativeplantcenter.net. And so basically it's a searchable database of this exact same book. So you can go in and select all of the parameters that you want out of a plant by using this kind of searchable database. So you can select your region. So coastal plain, plant type, you're looking for a tree, sun exposure, it's part sun to full sun. So you can make all of these sort of stipulations in your search. Now, if you come up with nothing, it might be that your parameters are too narrow, right? So you might want to open up possibilities, but you can even look for what color of flower you're interested in, when it starts blooming, what kind of fruits it produces. You can really get specific. But again, don't get too specific or you might not find anything that fits the bill. So this is a really great starting point for people who are searching for very specific parameters. Or like I said, if you're looking for plants that bloom in the spring, maybe you're searching for first bloom. Yeah, so this is a really great starting point. But again, if you're having trouble navigating these resources, you can always email myself or talk to me. I'm happy to talk over the different options. You can also go to, whoops, I think that was last week's. You can also go to these native plant nurseries and chat with the staff there. They will know the plants and they'll be able to make really good recommendations based on their experience. So I'm at the end of the presentation. I'm happy to take questions. I'm sorry if I rushed through that. I just wanted to make sure that we covered everything.
Michaela, I have a question. I'm not sure I even know how to ask it.
Okay.
But when you go to these nurseries, and you are looking for something specific, should you be using that formal name that, the names that the ones that we can't pronounce and can't
Yes.
spell and
The Latin names, yeah.
Okay.
Yes, I would say yes.
Okay.
Especially if you know what you want.
Right.
Let's use an example. So let's say you have a wet area where you want swamp milkweed. If you go and just say, I want milkweed, what they may give you the option of is the other two, which are like dry habitat, right? So, but if you say swamp milkweed, most nurseries will know what you're talking about. But that's the problem with common names is that sometimes they're interchangeable and it's regional. So some people call it by a different common name like shadbush and serviceberry. So it's really helpful to have the specific scientific name.
Okay.
And even if they don't have it, they may have a recommendation for something very similar that could fill the same role.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Good to know. Yeah.
No, that's a really good question. And I do encourage using the scientific name if you can, even if it's just like written down if you don't know how to say it. That way you kind of you make sure that you're getting exactly what you need.
Yeah, a good example I think is it verbatim or verbatim?
Yes.
There's I was looking for that and it seemed like there were so many varieties.
There are.
Okay.
And it's good to note that viburnums in particular, there's a lot of non-native viburnums that don't have as many benefits as our native ones. So you're absolutely right. Like you could go and get a non-native one and then not realize that it wasn't exactly what you were looking for.
Okay. And then I have one more question. I'm new to the area and I've recently found out about the native plant sale that Atkins Arboretum does.
Yeah.
So they have a wide variety, a lot of these things that you've brought to our attention.
They do.
Okay.
But I should say, you know, they're not the only source of native plants, especially on the shore. Now, not supposed to recommend any one company. I don't endorse any one company, but Adkins Arboretum has a nice sale. Environmental Concern in St. Michael's, which I know could be a little bit further for you, also has a spring sale. And Unity Nursery, also stocks a really nice variety of native plants. I know people have spoken very highly of it. And I think someone recommended one up near Chestertown last week, but I cannot remember the name of it.
Hmm.
So
I think it was the mill.
the
Yeah,
mill,
Dillon,
thank you.
they have like a native section.
Okay, excellent. The mill. Okay, I'll have to look
Okay.
that up. I'm gonna write it
There's
down.
also Unity Gardens in Churchill.
Mhm, mhm.
Yes, yes, they have a nice and they're very supportive of the native plant sales. So another thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna send you all a link because our Maryland Native Plant Society actually has a list of nurseries, plant nurseries in Maryland, Delaware, sometimes Pennsylvania and Virginia too, that all sell native plants.
Okay, good.
So that might be helpful to you as you're looking at places to shop. And I'm so glad you're cognizant of where you're shopping, because if you can go as local as possible, that's your best benefit. I try to discourage people from shipping plants from like the Midwest, because those plants are grown in a very different environment. The Midwest is, even though it may be native to both the Midwest and here, those plants have grown up and they've you know, they've developed back there. So they're not quite adapted to our climates as well, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have
Good
two things
questions.
I could bring it up. One is we live in an area that's very wooded, and
Yes.
we have had an explosion of pawpaw trees.
Oh, I'm jealous.
An explosion. It's amazing. We have them everywhere. Wonderful understory tree. And also I'm like, what are these things with these huge leaves? And I saw the fruit this past year. I tell you that as soon as it's ripe, it's gone.
Yeah. Yeah. They are very popular, and for a good reason. I don't know if you've ever tried pawpaw. It's
I have
it's a very like custardy kind of fruit. It's like a combination of flavors between a banana and a pineapple. And so the wildlife, of course, will snatch it up in a hot second. I'm very jealous because pawpaw is one of my favorite trees. And it also has kind of interesting fall color. It also turns like a yellow, a bright yellow color.
The other thing I wanted to bring up is you can buy packages of seeds that are native seeds for our area. I think it's Prairie Nurseries. I'm not positive. But if you want to put in like a fairly good sized patch, you can buy them, whether they're deer resistant, and you can buy them for the area as well as for your growing condition. And it's a mix of wildflower seeds, whether they're grasses or whatever. So if you just want to dig up your soil and put these seeds in and grow a patch of really nice native plants for your area, that's another opportunity.
That's a good point. Although what I would also say about that is Prairie Moon Nursery is located out of Minnesota. And so those ecotypes of those seeds tend to also be from the Midwest. And while we may have some success growing them here, I've actually found, so you've hit the right topic for me because native seeds is my passion project. I have better germination rates from seed that I've collected from the wild than I have from commercially sold seed from Prairie Moon Nursery. So if you have it, while you might be able to find a wider variety from there, if you can find it locally and collect the seed, I think that's a better opportunity.
I'm not
So
sure if it's Prairie Moon or what it. I'm going to run out to my. I have some leftover, so I'll be right back.
okay.
See you.
Do we have any other questions? You
Michaela, I've
guys
got
are.
a question in the chat. This is
Oh, I'm
Carol.
sorry. I didn't notice that. Okay. Should we prune serviceberry and redbud trees now? No. In fact, I'm really glad you brought that up because anything that blooms in the spring, we should not be pruning them at this time because all you're doing is pruning off the stems that are going to bloom. So what I like to say is anything that blooms in the spring, you wait until right after its bloom period, and then you prune it to the shape or the desired form that you want. The only exception to that rule is if there's a diseased branch and you need to cut it out, or if it gets damaged. So let's say, we had ice or snow several weeks ago. If you had a branch that broke, I would say you can prune that out anytime. Any broken branches can be taken out, or dead branches.
Okay,
But yeah,
so
otherwise you're
that
going
might
to
be in the
lose.
summer then, I assume, then if it's,
Yes. Mhm.
Yeah. Thank you.
After it's done. Yeah, anything that blooms in the spring, I wait until right after. Although, pruning itself is a whole different topic, but a lot of things can be pruned in the winter, with the exception of flowering things in the spring. There's
Got it.
always an except. I'm so sorry. I don't have like an absolute answer for everything. I always go, it depends, and people hate that.
Mikhail, I got them from American Meadows.
Oh, American Meadows, yeah. And I'm trying to remember. I think they're out of Missouri, so a little bit closer. But like I
Well, they
said, if you
definitely
have,
they give you a blend for that's supposed to be for your particular area.
yes,
You
okay,
choose
I
it.
see what you're saying. So it's like a seed mix, which
Yes.
is a really great point because a lot of people get lured into buying those mixes from big box stores who I shall not name. They have things called like hummingbird mix and butterfly mix. Do not buy those. They tend to be non-native species that are annuals, so it doesn't really come back. And you're much better suited to investing in something that's not only going to be permanent, but has more value for wildlife. So I'm really glad you brought that up.
It has a mix of perennials and annuals. So
Yes.
you get your
Great.
plants right away as well as some that will be for a while. I have like a tiny little patch that I started, so I'm going to see how it goes and then plant some more this year.
Oh, well, report back. Let me know how it goes. I love to see pictures of progress.
Yeah, we have an area that coming into our property has a drainage ditch, so I have a wet area there. So I started filling it in with my wet plants and then
There you go.
different things around it. So lots of different opportunities around the property.
There always is. That's the thing about being homeowners, right? Is there's always opportunities. Do I have any other questions? And again, if you can't remember your questions right now, or let's say you're watching this as a recording, you can always send me an email. I love to see progress pictures. So if you felt inspired from this talk and you start working on something this spring, I want to see it. I want to see what everybody's working on. I want to see your progress. I will be following up today with an email that has a very important link to a survey. And again, this is to just help me kind of construct my programs and making sure that I'm having an impact on my audiences. So I just really appreciate you all being with me for these last 3 weeks, sharing my interest in native plants. It just really brings purpose to my job to know that people are interested and that people want to make a difference. So anytime you have questions, please hit me up. I'm happy to help you in any way that I can.
I appreciate it. It's been a great class.
Oh, good.
Thank you, Michaela.
I
This
hope
was-
so. I tried to make it different enough week to week, but again, I always appreciate feedback. So I will go ahead and stop my sharing here.
Yeah, thank you, Michaela. This was great. And the resources that you've shared are very invaluable. So
Oh, good.
Thank you.
And that's part of my job too, is making sure that when I'm not there, that you
Yeah.
have resources and things available to find what you need.
thank you.
Thank you guys
for
so
doing
much.
this, Michaela. It's been wonderful.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Peggy. I appreciate everybody. Enjoy your spring. Let me know about your progress. I really love to see it.